Today's Prime Minister's question session in the British Parliament has become a real arena for a heated political battle. In the spotlight was the leader of the opposition party, Sir Keir Starmer, who during the debate was mercilessly criticised for his statement regarding the budget and economic policy of the government. The whole dramatic moment turned out to be a real show, which did not leave indifferent any viewer involved in the political twists and turns of the UK. From the very beginning it was clear. Today is expected not just a standard exchange of remarks between the government and the opposition, but a real battle with accusations, revelations and bright moments. At the start of the session, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was met with sharp accusations from Starmer, who did not miss an opportunity to emphasise that the government's current budget is not just ineffective, but harmful to the British economy. He said the government was falsely claiming as if Britons would be richer as a result of decisions made in the spring budget. Starmer accused the government of deceiving the public and, in effect, implementing policies that only worsen the financial situation of ordinary citizens. The word lie rang out like a percussion shot, and it was clear that Starmer was determined. It did not take long for Rishi Sunak to respond. With great confidence, he began to defend the government, drawing attention to the various measures that had been taken in response to economic challenges, such as the increase in the national minimum wage and the expansion of the warm rebate program for households. Sunak tried to emphasize that his government was actively combating economic instability caused by global factors and was making efforts to improve the situation. However, his arguments, as the course of the debate showed, failed to answer the questions posed by Starmer. As the argument unfolded, the atmosphere in the room became increasingly tense. There was no shortage of personal jabs when Starmer began to point out that current government decisions are actually leading to a further deterioration in the lives of Britons. He emphasized that although Sunak promised not to increase taxes on workers, tax increases are actually becoming inevitable, and he again accused the government of planning to place even greater financial burdens on ordinary people. So why should people trust these promises? He asked rhetorically, which again drew a lively response. Sunak's response to these allegations was quite harsh. He assured that such statements by Starmer had no basis and were simply an attempt by the opposition to rock the boat in search of political points. Sunak noted that his government is not just rebuilding the economy, but is doing so in the face of global instability. He emphasized that amidst all these challenges, they have already made strides in improving the lives of Britons, such as raising wages for millions of workers. He also reminded that in an economic crisis, it is important not just to respond to current problems, but to act with a long-term view. However, the further the discussion progressed, the more obvious it became that none of the participants had any intention of conceding the battle for leadership of the political discourse. This tense clash culminated when Starmer again brought up the issue of high taxes on businesses, which he felt jeopardized the future of the economy. He accused Sunak of the government forcing companies to either cut wages or raise prices, which ultimately leads to higher poverty rates. Sunak, for his part, attempted to fend off these attacks, claiming that such accusations are completely untrue. He said that, on the contrary, the government was taking all possible measures to support businesses and protect jobs, but that the opposition's criticism, he said, lacked constructiveness and whose only intention was to create political instability. Amid this violent exchange of remarks, the audience in the room and the viewers on the TV screens could observe a very unique phenomenon: politicians willing to literally fight for every word, every number, every percentage point that could sway public opinion. Sunak and Starmer showed shining examples of how they were willing to go all the way in defense of their positions, and perhaps each of them believed that it was their arguments that would prove more powerful in the eyes of the voters. However, the reality was that none of them could unequivocally win this round. The debate has come to symbolize not only the political struggle between the two parties, but also the struggle for the future of Britain, which in the face of economic instability and global change needs a clear and coherent political strategy. Every word spoken at that moment could have an impact on the future government, on the decision of the voters and on the public mood in the country. With this understanding, both sides tried to use every opportunity to demonstrate their competence and their willingness to fight for the rights of ordinary Britons. As a result, as the following hours showed, the whole country watched the leader of the opposition questioning the government's decisions, accusing it of lying and manipulating the budget, and the Prime Minister defending his policies, assuring that it was he and his government that were working for the good of the people despite all the challenges. So ended this extravaganza, but the questions remain: who is really running the country? Who will turn out to be right in the long run? In the face of sharp attacks from the leader of the opposition, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak did not stand aside and began a vigorous defense of his policies, trying to draw attention to the successes of the government and the measures that have been taken to stabilize the UK economy in the face of global instability. He noted that the government was not simply cleaning up the consequences from the actions of its predecessors, as Starmer argued, but was actively working to create new economic opportunities for Britons. Sunak emphasized that in response to the challenges posed by global economic uncertainty, the government has taken a range of steps to raise people's incomes and maintain their living standards. One of the most important points he focused on was the government's recent initiative to increase the national minimum wage. Sunak emphasized that more than 2 million Britons will receive a significant increase, which he believes is a real boost for workers. This statement was immediately met with applause from members of the ruling party, but as in previous moments of the debate, it was not without sharp criticism from Starmer, who immediately questioned the effectiveness and fairness of this approach. He pointed out that despite these steps, the situation for many British families remains difficult, and the government's promises of improved living standards seem increasingly hollow. But Sunak continued to insist that the government is working to improve the well-being of citizens by introducing support measures, such as the expansion of the Warm Household Discount Programme, which will allow many families to save money during the cold season. However, despite Sunak's best efforts to prove otherwise, every attempt to strengthen his position was met with a new stream of attacks from Starmer, who reminded that the government is not addressing the real problems at all, but is only taking cosmetic measures. He pointed out that despite all the promises, many issues, including poverty and unemployment, have not been addressed in Britain. Starmer accused the government of continuing to deceive the people by claiming that an improved economy is on the horizon, while the real effects of their decisions have yet to come. He again cited the same spring budget, which he believes only makes the situation worse rather than fixing it. Sunak responded by saying that any claims that his decisions do not bring about change are simply attempts at political gamesmanship. He recalled that under his leadership the UK stabilized its economic performance and even managed to achieve economic growth despite the global crisis. In this context, the Prime Minister did not miss the opportunity to emphasize that his government was not engaging in populism, but was implementing long-term reforms focused on sustainable growth. Sunak pointed out that his actions are aimed at actually rebuilding the country after the difficult years of the pandemic, as well as maintaining the vital health sector, which needs more investment. This was another key point in his speech when he mentioned investment in the National Health Service, NHS. Sunak said that with the additional funds allocated to the health service, more appointments and more doctors will be provided, and the salaries of health workers will be increased. He emphasized that this decision by the government is vital to maintain the health of the nation and prevent further problems with access to health care. However, despite all these promises, Starmer revisited the budget situation, arguing that this decision does not solve the problems, but instead exacerbates them. He accused the government that the budget puts even more strain on the middle class and workers who, despite promises, will still be financially trapped. Starmer, for his part, did not limit himself to economic issues and took on more pressing topics related to social issues and the living conditions of citizens. He pointed out that despite claims to support the middle class, the authorities continue to increase taxes, which in turn leads to a worsening financial situation for many families. With this approach, according to Starmer, the government cannot claim the trust of the electorate, as its actions only exacerbate the current economic problems. Sunak, of course, could not remain indifferent to such an attack and responded again by saying that raising taxes is an unavoidable measure in the face of economic instability, but at the same time the government is working to provide additional funds for critical social and public programs. When the discussion turned to personal accusations against Sunak, the situation became particularly tense. Starmer decided to ask the Prime Minister an uncomfortable question about his promises regarding not only taxation but also broader policy positions. He reminded the Prime Minister of how the latter had promised not to raise taxes on workers, but had actually broken that promise already during his administration, which ultimately caused even more discontent among the population. Starmer even suggested to Sunak to ponder why people who believed in his promises now feel cheated and disappointed. Sunak attempted to respond that under such circumstances, the government had to make difficult and complex decisions in order for the country to move forward, and that the measures that had been proposed would have long-term positive effects on the economy. However, despite the government's attempts to justify itself, the problem was far from being solved. The questions being asked did not find unambiguous answers, and the situation only escalated. Both sides continued to exchange jabs and accusations, but as the debate unfolded, it became clear that neither side had any intention of conceding. The expectation really wasn't so much on solving economic problems, but on which politician would be more convincing in the eyes of voters. Self-confidence, the ability to manipulate facts and battle on the political field, were the main ingredients of this question and answer session. And while neither side achieved a clear victory, one thing is clear: the battle for Britain's economic future is just beginning. As the debate began to turn towards more localized and specific issues, it became clear that both sides were beginning to use real and relevant issues to strengthen their positions and attack their opponents. One topic in particular that came up during the session was the state of affairs in the UK's largest cities, and of course the subject of Birmingham, where the lack of proper maintenance of the city has become a topic of discussion as of late. Starmer, in an attempt to undermine Sunak's position, did not fail to point out how the incompetence of local authorities, supported by the Conservative Party, has had dire consequences. One glaring example was the issue of the 17,000 tons of garbage that had not been removed from city streets. Starmer did not hold back his sarcasm, stating that it would be normal to declare a state of emergency if this situation occurred in any other city in the world, which caused many in the audience to raise their eyebrows. This image created by Starmer became a symbol of inefficiency that he tried to impose on the government, while emphasizing that if Sunak really cared about his image and people's trust, he should give a concrete answer to these accusations. Sunak's response was no less vivid. The Prime Minister attempted to refute Starmer's words, saying that it was not the government that was responsible for the problems Birmingham faced, but the local authorities, which are run by the Labour Party. He emphasized that under the Conservative administration a number of measures had been taken to reduce the tax burden on local government and improve the situation for citizens, and that in this case the government should not be held responsible for the miscalculations of city leaders. Sunak said that he fully supported the decision of the Birmingham local authorities to declare an emergency, but at the same time pointed out that the situation in the city was the result of mismanagement by Labour, which has long ruled the region. Despite the excuses, however, Starmer continued to raise the issue of the government's ineffectiveness in dealing with social and economic problems. He again pointed out that incidents, such as the garbage on the streets of Birmingham, were becoming indicative of the whole country and demonstrated the total inability of the government to cope with current challenges. But Sunak, without losing his composure, continued to defend his position, arguing that the government is doing its best to solve the problems, but in such a crisis situation, instant solutions cannot be expected. With each new question from Starmer, the tension between the two politicians only grew. The questions became sharper and more sensitive, and the accusations became more personal and vivid. Sunak increasingly fell into the trap set for him by Starmer, forcing him to justify and defend not only political but also personal decisions. At one point in the debate, Sunak exclaimed that he did not intend to tolerate such attacks on his reputation, and that he and his government were working for the good of the country, despite all the difficulties and criticism. One of the most painful moments in the debate was the issue of fiscal policy and the future of the British economy. Starmer continued to insist that the government's budget decision, despite his assurances, does not address the growing economic instability. He said that in reality, all these tax increases and economic measures only exacerbate the plight of the middle class and workers, while the government's promises remain only on paper. Sunak attempted to respond to these charges, but his defense became increasingly unconvincing. Sunak's answers often found themselves locked in political phrases that did not always address the heart of the matter, allowing Starmer to bring up topics again and again that Sunak did not want to talk about. The debate culminated in a direct clash between the two politicians over the management of the British automobile industry. Starmer, focusing on the problems associated with car manufacturers and the possible consequences that await the British economy due to failed trade agreements, tried to emphasize that the government was not just failing to address the problems, but was putting thousands of jobs in key sectors at risk. He accused Sunak of incompetence and failure to protect the interests of British companies on the international stage. Sunak responded by attempting to justify his position, arguing that the government was taking all the necessary steps to protect the interests of British manufacturers, despite the difficult conditions surrounding global trade and Brexit. With each new question and answer, it became clear that the government and the opposition are at opposite ends of the political spectrum, with each side seeking to show that it is the one more competent to manage the country's economy. In this clash of parties, it became clear that this was not just about politics, but also about the deep mistrust between the leaders of the two parties, which inevitably puts a strain on their relationship and on the future of the UK as a whole. The debate continued in the same vein, and it soon became clear that neither side was going to concede. Sunak and Starmer continued to exchange jabs and harsh accusations, but amidst their bickering it was noticeable how important this moment was to both sides. Wherever these political battles led, one thing was clear. This was a moment that decided not only the fate of the current government, but also the future of the country in the face of global economic instability. Local issues, such as litter on the streets of Birmingham, were becoming just a vivid symbol of the more global crisis the UK faces in its political and economic realities. And in this context, every moment and every word became not just part of a political struggle, but an important step in finding a way out of the crisis.